when I went blind, I could have sat around and just told myself stories of poor me and life's hard and this sucks and this is unfair. And those could technically be true stories. But I could also tell myself a different story, a better story that said, all right, this happened to me. It's not ideal, but maybe this happened to me because I'm one of the few people with the mental toughness and resilience to be able to deal with it, to overcome it, and use it to help other people. Now, that also could be a true story. So which story am I going to tell myself? One that attaches meaning to my circumstances that turn me into a victim, or one that it's like a Jedi mind trick that takes this unfavorable basket of circumstances and flips it into an advantage for me?
Before we get into it, I'd like to chat about today's sponsor, VitaDrop. I've been using the VitaDrop sleep product for about a year now, and it absolutely blew me away the first time I used it. I looked at my sleep tracker and it had a 30% increase in my REM sleep. I'm somebody who spends a lot of time trying to optimize my sleep, and I'd never seen anything like that have a significant impact as it did. I remember messaging the co-founder, podcast guest, as well as a good friend of mine, Charlie, about it the next day, completely blown away. And then I've also shared this information with a number of people who have come back extremely surprised and very impressed with how much better they've slept once they've taken that sleep product. So they have 4 different products for 4 different day-to-day experiences. One of them being sleep, the next one being hydration, the third one being focus, and the fourth one being a collagen supplement. You can grab them both in ready to drink and in sachets that you mix with water. So if you're interested, use the code TOT in the description below to get 25% off your next order. Chad, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation.
Of course. You've got a quite a wild story, so I'd be very excited to get into it. So if you give me an elevator pitch of who you are, what you do, and how you contribute to the world, how would that sound?
Yeah, so I guess the elevator version is I went blind at 21 years old, totally blind due to this inherited retinal condition. But I came out of that experience happier and more successful than when I could see, which I used to take for granted. So now I've sort of shifted my attention from things like corporate strategy and deal strategy and more traditional measures of corporate performance, really shifting into optimizing human performance, where now I focus on explaining the anatomy of resilience so that I can empower other people so that they can bounce back from their setbacks stronger, sleeker, and resolute to succeed.
Yeah, brilliant. So your early years shape you as a human, right? So there's quite a bit in that. And your experience to date has, quite a few ups and downs and challenges, and the need to really build some focus and strength. So how do you think your early years allowed that to develop into the person you are now, aside from what actually happened?
Yeah, I think it hardened me, frankly, because it taught me early on that life is not all about motherhood and apple pie, a phrase we use here in the States, right? Life can be challenging. Whereas most kids were growing up dealing with an entirely different basket of circumstances, I was growing up learning the limitations of what I could see. I was bouncing off of things. It's always going to the hospital. If it were at night, I was playing at night. I couldn't see well at night. I went to the hospital so much that they actually questioned my parents and me in separate rooms whether or not they were beating me. And so there was a lot of discomfort for me, quite frankly. Growing up, there was the physical discomfort of getting hurt. There was the emotional discomfort of not being able to do things that I wanted to do. In high school, there was the social discomfort of not being able to do things like drive at night. And then as I got into college, there was the extreme discomfort of going totally blind. And so I think what it taught me is that discomfort is a part of life. And if any of us are just living comfortably, or I would say even complacently, then we're not growing. And it really helped me understand that comfort zones are complacency. And it pushed me to embrace discomfort from a very early age. I didn't want to embrace it at an early age, but certainly it calloused me to discomfort from a very, very early age.
So how old were you when you began to go blind?
Well,
So what was the story?
I was learning that I couldn't see as well as other people from a young age. So, 5, 6, 7 years old, but that was in really dark situations. I could still see all right during the day. So I played sports. I played football. I played basketball. I, even drove a car when I got older, and really started losing my eyesight. What I had around 19 years old, 19, 20. By 21 years old, I was in college. And that's when I realized that the gig was up, right? I wasn't going to be able to see any longer. I had to get a medical withdrawal from my major. I had to essentially lose about 85 to 90 hours of work, about 3 years of work. I had to flush that down the tubes and start all over. And so at 21, 22, 23 years old, everything that I had known about myself completely changed. I went from being somebody who was very active, very into sports, very, always on the go, to somebody who literally could not walk around without the assistance of someone or something.
How did that impact you? So what happened?
Massively. Yeah. For a long time, for quite some time, I sat around, I felt sorry for myself. I had this victim mentality. I felt like, I'd been cheated. I'd been robbed. Life is not fair. And I was frustrated. I was angry. And honestly, I was bitter. I was bitter at life. But I realized that I couldn't sit around feeling sorry for myself for the rest of my life. And so at quite possibly the deepest, darkest, most difficult moment in my life, I decided that I couldn't just sit around and feel sorry for myself for the rest of my life. I decided that I had to adopt a new philosophy in my life. And, thankfully I had some parents who gave me some straight talk and didn't hold me to a lower standard. But I just decided that I wasn't going to sit around making excuses about not being happy or not being successful, because excuses wouldn't serve me. And then, I had this really life-changing moment when I went to get my first guide dog. I went there to get a seeing eye dog at this place called Leader Dogs for the Blind in Michigan here in the United States. And I went there to get a guide dog, but I ended up getting a lesson and so much more. There were people there who had it far worse off than me. Some of these people didn't have any eyesight ever in their lives, and some of them were deaf and blind. And here I was feeling all, frustrated and bitter and angry for the cards that I'd been dealt. And living with these people for nearly a month taught me one of life's most valuable lessons. And that's, life is not about what you have or what you don't have. It's about what you do have. Like the gratitude that you have for the things that you've been given. And I think we all hear that message from, early ages, but living with these people who had it far worse off than me and personally observing the living courage by these incredibly courageous people. Some of them, were on dialysis because they had diabetes. Some of them had mental impairments on top of being blind. And, these girls there who could neither see nor hear were getting a dog to be independent. So it left me really ashamed of my pathetic attitude towards my situation. It just changed the way that I looked at everything from that point forward.
So that was the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think, just a random side note, but do you think from your experience, it would be worse to be born blind or to have sight and then experience that and then lose it down the line? Like what's your experience from that?
Yes. Yes. It depends is the answer. I think I like my situation because I have memories to draw upon and I have experiences to draw upon. But certainly there was a lot of change that I had to experience, a lot of personal transformation and reinvention that I had to contend with. And people who are born without sight don't have to go through that transformation. And they also are given skills, or they develop skills that I didn't develop. So they may know how to use a cane really well. I didn't develop good cane skills because I was in college when I went blind. So instead of learning how to use a cane, I ended up getting a German Shepherd to lead me around, or an Alsatian. I'm not sure what you call it there down under, but
yeah, German Shepherd.
Yeah, a big dog to lead me around. And people who are born blind, they probably learn how to read Braille. I didn't learn how to read Braille. I learned how to use a computer and engineer software on a computer to do my job more effectively because, I felt like it was a more pressing need for me to get gainful employment when I was in college. Had I been born blind, I would have had more time to learn Braille, but I was in my third, fourth year of college when I went blind. I had an immediate need to graduate and get paid. So I think it depends. If you can handle the change and the transformation, I kind of like my situation. But if you want the skills that would come with being congenitally blind, born blind, I think there's a lot of advantages to that. But there again, I think I was part of some different social circles because I could see growing up. I think a lot of times, people who are born blind, they may be put in different social circles. And so that can be an angle to it as well. Are they able to fully participate in the social things that we have going on? So that it's just, there are so many different nuances. There are pros and cons of both. I guess it's, the devil that you know versus the devil that you don't know. Like I'm comfortable in my situation because I've walked it for so long, but I guess everybody has their own sort of interpretation of that.
Yeah. Interesting. I've never, it's interesting to get an understanding of like the deeper nuances of kind of going blind and the experience you've had. 'Cause I've never actually been able to speak to somebody in any significant depth. So thank you for sharing. Yeah. It's interesting.
Of course.
Absolutely. There's a direction I'd love to take this as well. And I think I want to frame this question right, but at some point, when all of this happened, did you feel like the world was stacked against you?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, bitter, angry, poor me. I wasn't ever going to amount to anything. I was just going to end up living in my parents' basement. My parents built a basement in their house, and they never told me what it was for, but I just knew it was my loser basement. I was going to be like, that's the place I would have to live if I was too much of a loser to succeed in my own world, in my own life. And so, even though my parents had very good intentions, they were creating this safety net for me. And I felt the weight of that. And it honestly was one of the most motivating factors I could have asked for, because the last thing I ever wanted to do was spend one single day in that loser basement. You know what I mean? It was very motivating. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And so for people who are maybe down in the dumps and like something has rocked them in their life, do you think there's an ideal approach that somebody can take to get through those challenges? Like, do you think there's just like a playbook, or do you think it's very unique for individual circumstances? And if there is a playbook, like what do you think that is?
I do think there is a playbook. And I've spent years trying to understand that playbook, what allowed me to bounce back from my situation. And this is actually what I speak on when I go to speak to corporations, conferences, associations, and sports teams. It's what I like to think of as the anatomy of resilience. And so I do think there's a way of approaching the situation that can allow you to navigate it more effectively. And I think it starts first and foremost with recognizing that you have a choice. You have a choice in how you show up. You don't get to choose everything that happens to you, all the cards that you're dealt, but you do have a choice in how you play your cards. So I think the recognition of that and choosing to be more intentional about how you show up, how you attach yourself to certain circumstances. The second thing that people really need to be more mindful of, and this concept that I'm about to talk about, is the very foundation of resilient thinking. It is underpinned by a lot of science, but fundamentally it gets down to what are the stories that you're telling yourself about your situation? Are they stories that keep you trapped in a victim mentality? Or are they stories that allow you to bounce back with a visionary mentality? Now, when I went blind, I could have sat around and just told myself stories of poor me and life's hard and this sucks and this is unfair. And those could technically be true stories. But I could also tell myself a different story, a better story that said, all right, this happened to me. It's not ideal, but maybe this happened to me because I'm one of the few people with the mental toughness and resilience to be able to deal with it, to overcome it, and use it to help other people. Now, that also could be a true story. So which story am I going to tell myself? One that attaches meaning to my circumstances that turn me into a victim, or one that it's like a Jedi mind trick that takes this unfavorable basket of circumstances and flips it into an advantage for me? And so by doing this, I'm actually saying, hey, I didn't go blind because I have bad luck. I went blind because I'm mentally stronger than most people. So it literally takes this perceived weakness, this perceived disadvantage, and reframes it into a competitive strength. And when you do that, it gives you a new reason or new way of stepping into your circumstances. Now, the third thing that is really helpful is visualizing greatness, even in unfavorable circumstances. So how can I make blind look good? Now, that's a little tongue in cheek, but if I can never reimagine my future that considers my unchangeable reality, my blindness, and figure out how to make it look good, how can I ever move towards acceptance? So we have to learn how to make unfavorable circumstances work for us and not just against us. And that takes a little bit of work. The fourth thing that we have to do in my playbook is get comfortable with discomfort. Because if you're never getting outside of your comfort zone, then you're not growing. Life begins outside your comfort zone. So you have to get comfortable with discomfort. And then the fifth and final element of my playbook is take advantage of your disadvantages. Every perceived disadvantage offers us some advantage if we use it in the right context. So are you taking advantage of your perceived disadvantages? And so for me, it was figuring out how to take advantage of blindness. How, in what context can that actually help me and not just hurt me? So to recap, choose your response, figure out how you're going to show up, be intentional. Number 2, tell yourself the right stories. Number 3, visualize greatness even in unpalatable circumstances. Number 4, get comfortable with discomfort. And number 5, take advantage of your disadvantages.
It feels to me very stoic. You touched on a couple of things like viewing your situation in a different light and accepting it in like a positive frame, but also understanding it for what it is. And that is quite stoic. Do you have a stoic kind of understanding, did that develop through like reading anything in the Stoicism realm, or did that just kind of naturally come?
It kind of naturally happened, I think. I've obviously I've read some Stoicism as of late, but I wouldn't say that it informed. I didn't read it early enough on in my journey to really be influenced by it. I think the thing that, if I were to pick one single thing that influenced me early on, was probably Viktor Frankl's work. I was following Viktor Frankl's work. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work. He's an Austrian psychologist who was in a Nazi concentration camp back in during the World War, when Germany was taking over, and he has developed a form of
Man's Search for Meaning. Is that the book that you?
Man's Search for Meaning.
read?
Yeah, exactly. And he actually found a form of psychology called logotherapy, where he discusses the idea of finding meaning in the suffering. And that's the idea, is attaching meaning to the suffering that we experience. And now I like to think that the pain that we all experience is mandatory, but it's the suffering that's optional. If we can give new meaning to the pain that we go through, we can control the amount of suffering that we experience. Now, I talked about the discomfort and the pain that I was going through growing up. I don't suffer. When I was younger, I suffered. I literally still have the same or worse conditions today. I'm blinder than I was when I was younger, but I don't suffer. I'm actually profoundly happy, enriched, and fulfilled. And it's because of the meaning that I've attached to my circumstances. And another influential person later on in life was when I went to Harvard Business School, and I learned under the likes of Bill George, who is the former chairman and CEO of Medtronic, the world's largest medical supply company. He teaches at Harvard Business School.
Oh, looks like we lost him. Hello, sir. Welcome back.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it.
You dropped. You were gone. I have no idea. I've never seen that before. You fully just like your video just vanished. And I was like, all right, I guess he's dropped out. So when you went in the chat, I was like, I just thought I was here by myself. So I just started
somebody's
talking
always
shit.
watching us, Adam.
I was like, I'm just going to start talking shit to my producer.
I love it.
Oh, well, welcome back.
I don't know what happened, man. Sorry.
That's all right. No, you're right. You're right. Well, let's see if we can rewind the tape a little bit. And we're still recording. So you were talking about, You went to Harvard Business Review, Harvard Business School. And that's where we got to.
Yeah. So then I had the great pleasure to learn from Bill George when I went to Harvard Business School. And so Bill teaches authentic leadership at Harvard Business School. And he's the former chairman and CEO of Medtronic, which is the world's largest medical supply company. But he really helps leaders uncover their true north using his True North leadership framework. And what he has to say is not too different from what Viktor Frankl has to say. Now, Viktor Frankl dives into it from the aspect of psychology, but what Bill talks about really is mining your life's experiences to understand what has happened to you and what affects you on a deep emotional level, and how can you connect that to what you do on a day-to-day basis. So it really is understanding these moments in our lives that have affected us personally, and then linking that to your profession and to your passion. And ultimately what happens is you find out what does link with you, what does connect with you on such a level that it's more than just a job. It's a reason for being on the planet. And in my case, it's the reason for going blind. It's the meaning that I attach to my circumstances. Getting back to what I was saying about Viktor Frankl, the pain that I've gone through giving new meaning to the suffering. And when we do that, we can not only make the suffering more meaningful, but it's almost like it gives it new value, because no longer did I go through all of those experiences for me alone. I'm using it now to move beyond myself and reach and connect with others and help them overcome the challenges that they experience in their lives.
I quite like that. It's reminding me, again, going back to the Stoic stuff. It's I read this passage a while ago that said, better another straw on my back because I'm strong enough to handle it than one that breaks somebody else. And I was like, all right, just give it to me. Give me all the crap.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And that's what happens. Like when you go back to what I was saying about the anatomy of resilience, the stories that we tell ourselves, after you start telling yourself stories like that, saying, hey, this happened to me, Chad, because, I'm strong enough to deal with it. That becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. All of a sudden, you start to observe that your mental toughness and mental strength and determination and all of that starts to really get reinforced by the stories that you tell yourself. And by telling yourself better stories and reimagining how you can make things work for you instead of against you, it gives you the framework for flexible thinking that whatever happens to you, you can overcome it. You can deal with it because you're no longer rigidly attached to the way that you think things have to be. You can be more adaptable and nimble and accommodate whatever happens or whatever unfolds in front of you without having to go, with this, idea that this wasn't part of my plan. Now I don't know what to do. It's like, okay, how am I going to explain this to myself? What's a story that I can tell myself about these unchangeable circumstances that is a productive story instead of just the, oh my gosh, poor me, this is miserable. My life, I must have the worst luck ever. That's what most of us do, right? We go to the worst possible story and we get stuck on that as a loop. And all it does is drag us down. It doesn't carry us forward.
I wanted to also dig into the framework in a bit more specificity. So would it be possible to, from your experience, the 5 points that you made, provide some specific individual and a specific individual example of each one? Because I feel like concepts without stories are a bit abstract, but actually understanding a specific story on each one is a really good way to hopefully lock that idea in to anyone listening.
Yeah. So we'll start with the first one, choose your response. This became evident to me when I was at Leader Dogs for the Blind. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. But when I was there and I was experiencing how these other individuals were showing up, they were showing up in circumstances that were far more difficult than I saw mine, right? I had a hard time imagining how they were doing it. And they did so with such grace and enthusiasm and such fearlessness that it really, it made me realize that a lot of people think that happiness is some sort of feeling that happens to you, that it's some sort of it's an emotion, and it's not an emotion. It's a decision. It's a choice that you make every single day when you get up. You can either choose to be happy, you can choose to look at what you've been given, or you can choose to be unhappy and look at what you don't have. And that's a power that all of us have, is we get to choose our perspective. Thankfully, as humans, we can be more aware and more conscious about the perspectives that we take on a given situation. And we can even choose alternative points of view and perspectives. So choosing our response is just a recognition that when you wake up in the morning, every single day, you have an opportunity to choose happiness and to choose success. You can either, just react without thinking things through, or you can take a more thoughtful, proactive, and intentional approach that says, all right, I've been given these circumstances. I didn't get to choose those circumstances, but now I have an opportunity to choose how I'm going to respond. Am I just going to react without really thinking things through? Or am I going to take a step back and look at what I've been given versus what I haven't been given? And there's studies out there that show, and Sean Aker is a great example of this. He's done a lot of research in happiness. He's demonstrated happy people are 31% more productive. They have 37% more sales, and they have 300% more creativity. So if you can look at how to be grateful for what you've been given, you can live a happier life. And based on the research and the science, that leads to more successful lives. So that's the first one. The second one, tell yourself better stories. I mean, everybody has an example right now that in their own lives, I'm sure there's something going on in their lives that they're not thrilled about. And so what's the story that they're telling themselves about that? My situation, right, kind of obvious. I could just sit around and tell myself stories of poor me. I chose to do something different in my life. I chose to tell myself a better story about my situation, about why I went blind, and about my ability to deal with my blindness. And everybody out there has the same power.
So
you
what
don't
was
have to
that
go
story?
blind to use this tool.
What was the specific story you told yourself beforehand, and then the story that you flipped it into?
Well, the story beforehand was poor me. This is unfair. None of my friends are dealing with this. Life isn't fair. This is bullshit, right? And then the second story that I started moving towards was, hey, this happened to me because I'm one of the few people on the planet who has the strength and the toughness to overcome it and use it to help other people. Now, technically, both of those stories can be true. But if both of your stories are true, why wouldn't you tell yourself the better story? Because at the end of your life and in your business, whatever it is that you're facing, I'll promise you this, you will become your stories. So you have to make sure that you choose those stories wisely.
Did you believe the second story when you first started telling yourself it, or did it take some time to grow into it?
It took time to grow into it.
Did you feel like a fraud at the beginning?
It was not like I didn't. Yeah, it was. Do
you get what I'm saying? You know that feeling that
I do. I do. Yeah. And I think maybe a little bit, but I think what gets a lot of people hung up here is that they tend to ask themselves, why me? And that certainly happened to me. I used to ask myself, why me? And when I would ask that question, make no mistake about it, I asked it with a certain tone that sounded like a victim. Why me? Why did this happen to me? This is so unfair. None of my friends have to deal with this. None of my family have to deal with this. Life isn't fair. Why me? What I learned to do over time was ask the same question, but just slightly shift the tone. So instead of asking, why me, with the tone of a victim, I started asking the very same question with the tone of some real curiosity. Why did this happen to me? I wonder why this happened to me. And if you just shift the tone a little bit, it opens the mind up to other possibilities. But as long as the tone shuts down any curiosity and insists on being a victim, the mind isn't open to other possibilities. And so, yes, to answer your question directly, was it a button that I pushed? and I felt instantly, like I instantly reframed my challenge.
Yeah.
No, it was a process.
Yeah, I like that.
It was a process.
Probably says a lot around the way that your tone and inflections can impact how you talk to other people.
Yeah, very much so. And, very few of us would talk to other people how we talk to ourselves, right? If we talk to other people the way that many of us talk to ourselves, we wouldn't have very many friends. And so, honestly,
Yeah,
I mean, the voice inside our heads can be some harsh places to be, right? Hearing some of the things that come out of the voice inside of our heads can be very cruel. And so I think it's important to at least be aware of it. And so that's, I think, a very important thing is just having the awareness of what are the stories reeling off in my head? What am I telling myself? That's a first step. Is like a lot of people don't even recognize that they have this voice inside their heads constantly beating them up. And instead of telling themselves those stories, they could be telling themselves better stories, but they're not even aware that there are stories going on in their heads. They don't have the awareness yet. And so that's a really important thing, is just getting a handle on what are those stories that they're telling themselves.
Okay, brilliant. And the next one?
Yeah, visualize your greatness. So for me, it was reimagining how I could make blind look good. So I know that sounds a little paradoxical, right? I mean, what does this guy mean? How are you going to make blind look good? When I first went blind, all I could think about was poor me. But then by stopping and saying, okay, if I'm going to have the boldest and most daring dream of how blind can work for me instead of against me, what does that look like? So then I started thinking, all right, well, I'd like to be a role model for people who are disabled and show people that they're capable of more than they're giving themselves credit for and more than society is giving them credit for. So what needs to happen in order for that to take place? Well, I need to relearn how to learn, because I was in college. I was a visual learner, which wasn't very helpful. So I need to relearn how to learn. It turns out I was actually a better blind student than sighted student.
Really?
I made straight A's, made the dean's list, and went to work for a top consulting firm.
What changed?
Because I figured what changed? My situation forced me to commit. Being blind forced me to be committed to myself and to the task at hand. And so I needed a better perspective. I needed more focus. I needed better effort. And I needed an incredible amount of determination. And what it did, instead of just memorizing bullet points for my curriculum at university, I read the book twice. I recorded the lectures and listened to them multiple times. I accidentally became comprehensive, right? I was forced to really take it seriously. And so I went from being a good student to being an A student. I didn't make below an A. I made the dean's list. I graduated and went to work for a top consulting firm because my situation forced me to commit. It forced me to be focused and to be very determined to succeeding. But that vision of greatness that I had was, I want to be a successful business person and show people that you don't have to be able to see to be a successful business person, and to give themselves an opportunity to hope for something, right? And to show people that. And, from that point forward, I had to get a couple of promotions. I became a successful business person. I worked as a consultant. I did marketing. I did pricing strategy. I was a senior director and even vice president at a large, Fortune 15 company, and, led large teams, whether that's on pricing strategy and solutions for multi-billion-dollar deals, whether that's corporate finance teams. I did all of that. without being able to see. And, that vision of greatness for me that I had inspired me to do the hard work, to relearn how to learn how to use a computer, to learn how to write code, to engineer my software so that I could do my job more effectively without being able to see my computer screen. Make no mistake about it, that stuff was hard when I was doing it, but my vision of greatness that I had for myself was so bold and so inspiring that it motivated me to do the hard work, to learn how to do those things. And, since having the success doing that, my vision of greatness for me has evolved yet again. So now it's moved to where I know that I have an opportunity to help a lot of people and do a lot of good in the world by reaching them either on stage through my keynote speaking or through my book that was published through HarperCollins or through the other things that I've got going on, whether that's leadership coaching or training classes or resilience workshops, things that I do. And I didn't know how to do any of those things before I decided I wanted to do it either. It's not like I just knew how to be a keynote speaker or just knew how to write a book. I had no clue how to do any of those. But the bold vision of greatness that I had motivated me to do the hard work to learn how to do those things and to build the business to be able to do those things and reinvent myself.
Yeah, I like it. Do you specifically in developing the tech side of things to help with your life, what does that actually look like? I'm so curious.
I've got a computer that has a piece of software on it that talks to me. And again, I've, professionally and personally, I've spent a lot of time writing code to make that work more effectively. Whether that's, with Excel, because I used to use a lot of Microsoft Excel for my finance and pricing jobs. So I've written a lot of code for Excel and lots of other programs. I used to do that for companies too, for their enterprise software systems, whether that's customer relationship management system. I did that for one of Oracle's systems that they didn't think could be done. In fact, Oracle told me it wasn't possible, but I'd actually already done it. The next thing I know, they're sending me business, and actually I called to testify in a lawsuit because of that, which was not as much fun. But so there's the technology on computers. My iPhone talks to me. Your iPhone has the same capability. I have an Apple Watch. We have Apple TVs all throughout the house. They make the TV completely accessible. Anything that we can drive to an accessible platform, i.e. thermostats in my home. I can control the thermostats in my home with my Apple phone, with my iPhone. I can control the home theater devices in our living room with my iPhone. I can access, like you think about, if you go to a hotel, people used to use alarm clocks. Well, now that's on the phone. People used to need a calculator. Well, now that's on a phone. People used to have organizers. Now that's on a phone. Everything that goes to the phone, because the phone platform itself is inherently accessible and usable, anything that you can drive to that platform also becomes accessible. And so the opportunities that it has unlocked it's hard to really wrap your mind around. Everything that you can drive to the phone, it unlocks. It's no longer a black box. I mean, I can even literally communicate with our cars, which sounds a little scary. You think about a blind guy communicating with a car. I'm not actually driving it, but I can communicate with a car through the phone, which is pretty cool. And we actually did have a Tesla at one point. I was hoping that I could get it to take me where I wanted to go, but then I kept reading the news, so I decided I should probably wait on that.
Yeah, they'll figure that one out pretty soon. That is the next step. You just talk to your car, and it'll drive you to where you need to go.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll Uber for now until they get the kinks ironed out.
Maybe there's a collab between you and Elon Musk. You could become a spokesperson for the self-driving cars.
He's going to have to earn some confidence from me first. I've read too many of the damn reports.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, I understand. And that was a little side note. So going back to the 5 steps and the examples.
Oh, yeah. So the fourth one is get comfortable with discomfort. And so sometimes, we're motivated to get comfortable with discomfort, by the loved ones in our lives. And so I actually, to get comfortable with discomfort for myself, one of the things that I do regularly is I train in Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm. I love Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
And if you don't know what that is, it's the martial art of grappling. It's entirely hands-on, and which is kind of good for me, because if it involves striking, then I would just end up being the punching bag, right? That wouldn't be a good martial art for me. So I wanted to spend time with my kids, so I got us all involved in Brazilian jiu-jitsu because I really wanted to be able to spend time with them doing some activity, like showing them how to shoot a basketball or kick a soccer ball or play catch. Obviously, those aren't really options for me anymore, so we do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. We all train in Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
I love that.
And there's a lot of opportunity to get comfortable with discomfort with Brazilian jiu-jitsu. The first few times that you have somebody put you in a chokehold with no way out, it is terrifying, Adam. It feels like somebody's putting your head inside a vacuum cleaner bag.
Yeah.
But a funny thing happens. The more you move towards that fear, the more you learn to settle into the terror. So instead of panicking and having your adrenaline take over, you learn to slow your breathing, to bring your heart rate down, to step through the fear and calmly look for a way out. And a lot of times you find that those seemingly inescapable chokeholds actually have a way out if you can just stay calm enough to look for them. And I found that is incredibly helpful in life. You don't have to be on the mat training or fighting Brazilian jiu-jitsu to benefit from that. You can be dealing with a scary personal issue or maybe a stressful work-related issue. So the more that you get comfortable with discomfort, the more you'll notice your comfort zone expanding. And that's because you're expanding. You're stepping into a deeper, more dynamic sense of self. So I found that, if we can just get comfortable with discomfort, we set ourselves up for growth. We set ourselves up for expansion. We don't let fear dominate us. In fact, I found that actually for me personally, I don't want to move away from fear. I want to move towards fear because I know on the other side of my fear is my growth. And that's one of the things that jiu-jitsu has taught me. Move towards the fear, embrace the fear, just settle into the fear, get really comfortable in the fear. And the more you go to it, the more comfortable you are in it, and the less scary it is, and the less control it has over you, and the more resilient you become.
Yeah, I think doing martial arts with your kids is amazing. I feel like I developed a lot of confidence and skills when I did jiu-jitsu. I think I did it when I was...
Oh, you did BJJ too?
Yeah, for a couple of years when I was 16 to 18. And it just gave me this like quiet confidence. But to be honest, I was gunning for my blue belt and I didn't get it fast enough. And then I went to a different studio and I got my ass handed to me and I thought, I quit. I quit. But but it's been floating around in my head for a while to go back. And I think at some point in the near future, I'll be stepping back into that because I think it's calling me again. So, yeah, absolutely love it.
That's the hardest part is taking the first step. I started jiu-jitsu. I was almost 46 years old. And I was totally blind. And somehow I thought this is a good idea. So at
It's a
40,
great idea.
at 40, yeah, great idea. At 47 years old, I had my blue belt. I had my blue belt for 4 months, and I decided I should compete in a tournament. That's going to be a great idea. Let's do a combat sports tournament. And I lost. I got my ass handed to me. I didn't.
Really?
Oh yeah. No, I got beat on points. I got beat on points, so I didn't get choked out, which is good. But I lost. I was going up against people, who had many more years of experience than I did, because I was a pretty fresh blue belt. I didn't have any stripes or anything like that. But again, I wasn't competing against those people. I was competing against
just
myself.
Normal, just people doing like no disabilities or anything, just like people.
Correct.
Just wow, that's
everybody. Yeah, this is no disabilities. Yeah. I go
in. Solid effort.
Hey man, I'm going back too, because I'm not trying to, of course I want to win, but winning to me, the real victory isn't beating my opponent. The real victory is not letting fear control me. Again, I want to move towards fear. The very reason I did that tournament is because I was scared of doing the tournament. That's why I did it. Yeah. It's I don't want fear to control me. I want to go out there. And if you'd heard my professor, I probably should have been scared because of the stuff he was saying. He's like, Chad, you got to be careful. In the gym, people are, we compete here, but people aren't trying to rip your arm off. You go to these tournaments, and they'll take your arm home with them if they can. They don't care. Yeah, they will absolutely rip your arm off. I was like, hey, stop trying to cheer me up, coach.
That's probably one thing with my experience of jiu-jitsu. I was very passive. I was a passive, fighter. I would get myself in the worst positions possible and then see how I could get out of them.
Well, there's a case for that.
You got me out. All right.
Yeah, that happens to me, especially with the upper belts. I'm a 3-stripe blue belt. I'm probably not far off of getting purple, and I roll with guys who've been doing it for a long time, and inevitably I end up in a defensive position. If you're rolling with a black belt, you should expect that. If you're rolling with a brown belt or a purple belt, it happens, and there's a case to be made for working on that part of your game. I don't mind it, actually. I'll actually, it's fine for me to end up in a defensive position, because I'll get to work out of some tight spots. It's okay, well, this is the day I'm going to work on, getting out of this uncomfortable position. Which
exactly.
I love it, man.
And we want to get comfortable in the discomfort. Yeah, I can imagine.
Exactly.
I know.
Yeah, it's when you've got somebody on you and they're literally going for a choke and you're in the tightest possible spot. Are you tense? Are you breathing heavily? Or are you really relaxed? And are you breathing normally? And just patiently waiting for your opponent to make a mistake. And that's what getting comfortable with discomfort does, is it teaches you to remain calm and relaxed so that you can look for a crack, an opening, and you can find a way out. And funny thing is, once you learn to do that, you actually end up getting out of a lot of bad positions because you're not panicked, you're calm and you're relaxed and you're looking for an opening, as opposed to just saying to yourself, oh no, this isn't good, right? I mean, you can't work out of a situation if all you're saying is, oh no, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'd be very curious to see, because me at 16 to 18 and me now are very, very different people, of course. And I've built a lot of techniques through, meditation and yoga and some quite challenging life experiences. And I've done a lot of mental toughness work through ice baths and stuff like that. And I know that I can get really good at things now. So I'd be curious to see, going back into it at 31, how I will pick it up versus now, versus when I was younger. So I'll keep you in the loop if I do that. I'll let you know. Yeah. It's some point this year.
I'd love to hear how it goes.
Yeah, definitely. I'll let you know. And just the last one you had, take advantage of your disadvantages. What's your example of? Well, I mean, it's quite clear, but I'd like to hear it in your words.
I mean, I've got a few here. I guess, I'll give you a business one just to make it. I've got some funny stories. I've got some business stories. I'll tell you a business story here, and you can tell me if you want to explore other areas. But the one that I think of is I was working at a large commercial outsourcing company, a large technology company, and I was interested in doing a job pricing these very large deals. And these are multi-billion-dollar deals. They're very complex technology services deals. And the Excel models, the Microsoft Excel cost models and pricing models that we used were very complex. There were hundreds of them, literally hundreds of them, and they were interconnected and pre-linked. And we're talking hundreds of files with 15, 20 tabs and just hundreds of thousands of calculations. And a lot of people probably looked at me and were like, how in God's name is this blind dude going to be able to do the job? And, what they did not know is that my blindness actually gave me an advantage with this kind of a setup. And what I mean by that is, in order for me to just be able to use Microsoft Excel, I sat down and wrote 13,000 lines of code to connect my software to Microsoft Excel's object model. So behind Microsoft Excel, many people may or may not know, but there's what's called a document object model. And it's what allows programs like Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Word to communicate with one another. Well, it's also what allows my software to talk with Microsoft Excel. So I had to connect my software in a very robust way to Microsoft Excel just to be able to use the program. And what it allowed me to do was understand at a very, very deep level how I could automate a lot of the work that we're doing using software code. So a lot of people would have to go in and do these very manual tasks with our job, like relinking files and to hundreds of files. They would have to relink hundreds of files at once, and it would take hours and hours and hours for them to do that. I wrote some code that did it automatically. So instead of me spending hours and hours and hours linking files, I literally wrote some code using Visual Basic. I wrote a macro using Visual Basic code. Didn't take me long to write it because I knew the object model of Excel because of my software that I needed to link to it. And so everybody else is spending hours and hours and hours doing it. I would sit down, I would fire off my macro, and then walk off and get a cup of coffee and come back, and everything would be done. So these people who kind of doubted or wasn't really sure whether or not I could do the work, they couldn't believe it. Like the blind guy who literally can't even see his computer screen ended up writing automation for this very complex Excel spreadsheet system that we ended up using across the entire company that saved us all kinds of time and money across our entire global team. So sometimes, what looks like a disadvantage actually gives you a huge advantage. And the other thing is, because I had to be so technical just to be able to use a computer, when I was selling technology deals, I understood a lot more about the technology that we're selling, the services that we're selling, because my blindness forced me to have a deeper technical understanding. So when I was looking at selling, whether it was help desk or desktop computing or servers and storage or networking or applications or any of those services, I understood them more than the average person who wasn't forced to use technology in the way that I was forced to use it.
It gives me the analogy of just the skill sets you're developing. A lot of the times you don't really understand where they're going to become useful. And you just got to keep learning and applying yourself, because at some point these things just come together in ways that you would never expect. So, yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm conscious of time, but I do have a few more questions I'd love to ask you. And then do you mind if we do some like rapid fires and then call it?
No,
Call from
fire
there?
away, man. We're good.
There's, when you got to your dark, like we're going to go all the way back a little bit. There was something I wanted to ask you, but when you got to your darkest point in all of this, that point where you know, just before you began to find your way out of it, what was that feeling like? What did that actually feel like? And what was that experience in your day to day?
I'd say hopelessness, right? That's the hardest part, I think, is the hopelessness that we face. Because I really believe that if we think we're powerless, then we learn hopelessness. And it's hopelessness that prevents us from taking action. So I think what got me out of it was seeing a path forward with the technology, that there was technology that could help me do something to improve my situation. And it was that autonomy that I saw with the technology that gave me hope and optimism. And that hope and optimism gave me enough confidence to take the next step. And I think that's crucial for anybody facing circumstances is, do you see some autonomy in that situation, or do you feel powerless? If you feel powerless and you don't see a path to autonomy, it's really, really hard to take the next step.
That goes back to Viktor Frankl's work, doesn't it?
Does that answer your question?
There's always a choice. Yeah, for sure. It's just hopeless, but the side note to it and the way to get out of that is just to remember there is always a choice.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really great for, leaders out there. If you have company or team leaders with a team, like, okay, you're facing change, you're facing disruption, whether it's a merger, an acquisition, a divestiture. Do people feel like they have agency in the situation? Do they, or do they feel like they have no control over the situation? And if, those things affect mindset, whether we want them to or not, we're all human, and if you don't feel like you have some control over the situation, it's really, really hard to have that hope and optimism when you feel like you're just a bystander, but you're being affected by it.
I guess there's a lot of situations where you don't have control of much, but if you think about it, there is always some form of control, even if it is just the control of your thought. And I think that's maybe where you begin, right?
Absolutely. What are the stories that you're telling yourself?
Exactly.
How are you choosing to show up? What meaning do you attach to your circumstances? That's always your choice. You always get to choose the meaning that you attach to circumstances. It's easy to divest yourself of that responsibility, but that's a dangerous, dangerous thing to do, because none of us are responsible for all of our circumstances. Not one person is responsible for their circumstances, but every single person has to be accountable for their life and their outcomes. Because at the end of the day, this is my life, so I've got to own it. And that's your life. You've got to own it. If you don't own your life, who will? If you don't own your career and your happiness, who will? So you don't get to control everything that happens, but you've got to take accountability for it. It's really important.
What advice would you give someone who's navigating like a newly diagnosed disability, like professionally, romantically? We've spoken about mindset, but just in those other specific elements, just getting their mind in an appropriate headspace to make the most out of their life.
I think that's the most important part. I've talked to people who are going through this. I think the most important part is controlling the mindset, because the technology, I think that all that stuff is very learnable. Beyond the mindset stuff that we've spent some time talking about, I'd say for both professionally and romantic, like you've got to believe in yourself. Like if you don't believe in you, who else is going to? And so having the confidence to believe the stories that you're telling yourself, assuming, that you're following the 5 steps that we've already talked about and you're telling yourself the right stories and assuming they're positive stories and they take you where you want to go, having the confidence to believe that you can do it and believe that you've been equipped to deal with the situation and being willing to take the next step and do the hard work, but believing, and that belief in you is attractive from a romantic and a professional standpoint. Like, who wants to have a romantic partner who doesn't believe in themselves? Who wants to hire somebody who doesn't have the self-confidence they can do the job? Nobody. So that's probably one of the biggest obstacles is do I really deep down believe I can do it? And, that's a gut check. It's hard enough when you're not faced with a disability. When you're faced with a disability, it's even harder, obviously, especially if it's a recently emerged disability. But it starts with so stories that you're telling yourself and really believing it. Like, those stories become who you are. And you manifest your future with the stories that you tell yourself. It starts with the internal dialogue that you have in your head, the narrative going on inside your head, but then it becomes the words that you use, the actions that you take, the clothes that you wear, the friends that you make, where you spend your time. Are you training? Are you learning? Are you growing? Or are you just sitting around sulking? Like, if you really believe those stories, once those stories go from an idea to a manifestation, then the belief comes, the confidence comes, and it does translate into your romantic and your professional endeavors.
What would you tell yourself, the 19-year-old version of yourself, if you could go back and speak to him now?
My 9 or 10 year, buckle up, I guess. I don't know. I guess I would say, don't expect it to be easy, but it doesn't have to be easy to be enjoyable. In fact, the easier it is, the less enjoyable it's likely to be. Like,
quite paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because if somebody were to hand you everything that you ever wanted in your life, how grateful would you feel for it? How rewarded or how rewarding would it feel? How accomplished would you feel? Versus if you had to really work 10 times harder to get it, but you got it, wouldn't it mean so much more to you? It does to me. The fact that I've had to work so hard to get from where I was to where I am today makes everything that I experience today so much more meaningful and fulfilling. And so I'm convinced that maybe when we're younger, we think that, life should be easier and the talented people, they've got it. Like, if they have everything given to them, and we could use the word talent loosely, maybe it's, physical talent, maybe it's intellectual talent, maybe it's economic talent, maybe it's, family talent, however you want to look at it, people who've been blessed. And if those people have had everything fall in their laps their whole lives, are they really happy? Are they going to be as happy as those who've had to work hard for it and who've had to dedicate more time and energy and effort?
No.
I found for my own personal life that the things that I've had to work harder for, I appreciate more and bring me more
Mm,
joy and fulfillment. So that would be my
mm,
message to my younger self.
mm. Just get that bread, work hard, push through. It'll be okay.
Life's going to happen to all of us, man.
Mm,
Whether you go blind or something happens to a family member, or, eventually something's going to happen to all of us.
mm,
It's inevitable.
mm,
And so the key isn't whether or not it happens to you, it's how you respond. How do you choose to show up even when things aren't breaking your way?
mm, mm. And that's the real test for who you are as a person usually. Like everything's easy when it's easy.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll find out what you're made of when things go south, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. What do you think the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you is?
My mom literally read every single one of my college business books to audio for me when I was in college because it was the only way I could get the information. They didn't have digital books. There was nothing electronic. She literally sat down and read every single one of my business books to tape, to cassette. I don't know if people know what that is now, but it was to audio cassette.
Wow.
And like when somebody does something like that for you, go ahead.
Go on. There you go.
Well, I was going to say, like, when they do that, like, you can't not be affected by that. You can't not be inspired by that. Like, I couldn't let her down after she did all that. Like, I couldn't become a college dropout after she did that. You know what I mean? I had to like come correct and be, deliver the goods. And that's a big part of why I was so inspired to make straight A's and relearn and make the dean's list and all that, is because after somebody commits and they move beyond themselves and selflessly do something that's so extraordinary, how could you ever let that person down?
For sure. The also as a nice little side note, she ended up starting a 8-figure e-commerce business from all the knowledge she gained from all the books she read.
Well, she did get an honorary accomplished alumni award from the University of Tennessee. When they gave me the award, they also gave her an honorary award as well, which was very nice. I mean, they should have, because she probably read those books more carefully than a lot of my classmates.
I know, right? Oh, that's a beautiful story. Would you say that your mum's an inspiration to you?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, she did everything at home. She was our plumber, she was our electrician, she was our carpenter, our homekeeper, our caregiver, and she still worked full time as a bookkeeper. She was like today's iPhones. She did it all. Kind of makes you wonder what my dad was doing, but he was working around the clock. But yeah, she was a very inspiring person because she was selfless, she was committed, and she was infinitely adaptable and flexible to do whatever needed to be done, which was very, very inspiring for me.
Yeah, amazing. Well, yeah, that's a beautiful story. I appreciate you sharing that. Lightening it up and just like getting onto a tail end. What's your ideal morning and evening routine like?
Well, my ideal morning is up early, 5:30, take my dog out, go for a workout. Got a gym in my basement, so getting a good hour workout in, listening to an audible book usually is what I'll do while I'm lifting weights. So I'll lift weights in the mornings, and wrap up by around 7:00. Have breakfast with the kids before they go to school, and then have my own bite to eat, get showered and ready for the day, and then in the evenings, and I'll usually do jiu-jitsu throughout the course of the day at some point, whether that's in the afternoon or the evening. And then, for me, it's really important to have time with the family before we go to bed. And there's a thing that we do at my house. We call it thankfulness. And it's where we all go around and share 3 unique things that we're thankful for. Because it's my belief that from gratitude emanates happiness. It's not the other way around. In order to be happy, you have to be thankful. That's the only way that it works. And so with our children at home, and we've been doing this for 15 years now, we all share things that we're thankful for, and they have to be 3 unique things. And with kids, especially, they can tend to get a little bit lazy with it and not put any effort into it. And we don't allow that. We want, and the idea is, how do you bring the conscious attention to the very things that you subconsciously take for granted? That's the muscle memory that we're trying to create. And that, so that you don't have to work as hard in the future to be grateful. Because if you consciously bring your attention to those things every day, 3 times for three different things, the hope is that activity will work its way into your muscle memory, so that you can inherently be thankful for the things that we all take for granted, because it's human nature. We all take things for granted. And so it's very important, I think, to make a conscious effort to fight that, and to make sure that we are, whether it's something as simple as, the fact that we all have our health. That's something that comes up often. We all are very fortunate that we do have our health. Or maybe it's something big, or the point isn't really the size of it. It's just like, what's on your heart? What happened today? What's on your heart? And what's something that, like a small or big thing that you want to share with everyone? And so it's a really good time for us to get to know one another, to get to celebrate things with one another, but also help everybody learn how to have more perspective and more gratitude for the things that we can all easily take for granted if we're not careful.
I love it. Yeah, the gratitude piece is really, really important. And I've had a similar thing where I would write in the mornings 3 things I'm grateful for, and then at the end of the day, 3 things that were great about the day. And I notice when I don't do them for an extended period of time, there's a little bit less lightness in my day.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Makes a difference.
It's a great practice.
It definitely makes a difference.
Yeah. So is there anything you're excited about at the moment in your life that you'd like to let the listeners in on as we wrap up? Like, what are you working on?
Well, beyond, I've got several speaking engagements this year coming up. I'm excited about that. At conferences, got about 20 so far on the books, probably end up doing 60 to 70 this year. Really excited about that. I'm also excited. I was contacted recently by a TV producer who wants me to join an adventure series where we will be doing things like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. We will be heli skiing in the Rocky Mountains. We're going to be skydiving below the Arctic Circle. We've talked about filming me competing in another Brazilian jiu-jitsu competition. And we're even in talks with Blue Origin, potentially, to do the first blind space flight as well. So that should be pretty exciting.
Imagine. Brilliant.
Wild,
that sounds fun. So it's a crazy life we lead sometimes, right?
It is. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of that. That happened pretty recently. We'll see where it goes, but it should be an exciting year. We're going to welcome it right with open arms and just let whatever unfolds unfold.
I love it. And how can people find you if they're interested in exploring your works further?
Yeah, they can go to chadefoster.com. They can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Find Chatty Foster, Twitter or X at Chatty Foster, and I'm on Facebook as well. And all those links are on my website.
Cool.
Which again is chadefoster.com.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chad. And my last little question to tie it all off is, what do you think the meaning of life is?
I think the meaning of life is love and to be there for other people. I think that's what gives life meaning, is helping other people. I think without that, it just feels a little soulless.
Awesome. Thank you, Chad. I appreciate your time and your energy today.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate the opportunity.
Of course. Speak soon.